much, Kate. That was a great introduction. I wrote it myself. And beautiful job on the national anthem, by the way. It was really nice. It's great to be back in Broward County. I feel like I've been here so many times, I almost live here. I could establish residency. I came to the barbecue and brew event. I was here for an REC meeting and spoke at an REC meeting. Came back for the Unity Picnic about a month or so ago, I guess. And of course, I've been here a number of times for our Republican Liberty Caucus, our local chapter meetings. I chair the state organization of the state chapter of the Republican Liberty Caucus, which, as Kate said, we bill ourselves as the conscience of the Republican Party. We exist as a caucus within the party to try to help return the party to what we call its Jeffersonian roots of free people, free markets, and fidelity to the Constitution and limited government. It's what we're all about as an organization. I've got some good news to share with you right off the bat this evening. I know that many of you have probably seen some of the press reports about the poll that was released just last week that shows that Governor Rick Scott, in a head-to-head matchup with Bill Nelson, has now opened up about a 10-point lead over Bill Nelson, so that's great news. I think that deserves a round of applause. What you may not realize, though, is that that same poll also asked about the gubernatorial candidates in the Republican primary. And I'm very pleased to announce that I have now moved into third place behind only Adam Putnam and Ron DeSantis in that poll. And in fact, I'm only 1 percentage point behind Ron DeSantis. So for all practical purposes, I could claim to be tied for second place in the primary at this point in time. But it's an interesting poll because it shows that there are still, in the Republican primary, as many as 63% of the voters are still considered to be undecided in that race. So it's wide open. Bruce and I both agree that it's a wide open race, that anybody has an opportunity still to do well and to win that Republican nomination. So I'm excited about that and looking forward to what the new year brings as far as the campaign goes. The primary is going to be in August of next year. Tell you a little bit about myself. I am a fourth-generation Floridian. I grew up over in Polk County, Florida. All of my summer jobs as a kid and high school jobs before and after school were all involved in the citrus industry. We moved irrigation pipe before and after school. We picked fruit. We pruned trees. We hoed, the rows between the trees. Back then, we even fired the groves in the wintertime when it got cold enough. You don't do that anymore. So it was a great way to grow up. I had a really fine childhood. Very fortunate to have been a part of a family that, my parents, my father loved history, loved American history, loved to travel, and we would take these vacations during the summertime, 3 and 4 week vacations, which was it's almost unheard of these days. And they were always kind of themed vacations. Sometimes it would be like the Revolutionary War period. So we'd do a trip that would hit all of the important historical sites regarding that period of time, or the Civil War battlefields, or just what have you. But there was one particular trip that I remember very well. It's one of my earliest childhood memories. I'll share this story with you because it really helps to define who I am as an individual and who I am as a candidate running for governor. This was a trip to Washington, D.C., and I was probably only 5 or 6 years old at the time. So like I say, it's one of my earliest childhood memories. And one of the places that we went was the National Archives building. And I will never forget this, even at that age. How many of you have been to the National Archives building in Washington, D.C.? Well, then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. We probably had to wait in line for 45 minutes, okay? And you're in this very beautiful hall, very, very ornate hall. And as a little kid, I'm looking, and I can see the destination that the line is making its way up to. And it's this big vault, okay? And it's granite, marble, whatever it was made out of. It's this big vault. It's tall. And you've got the purple ropes and the stanchions out in front of it. You've got guards on both sides of it. And there's this quiet, almost a sense of reverence in the room as people are standing there in line. And I remember making our way up to the vault, and it was finally our turn as a family to walk across in front of it. And of course, the vault was taller than I was. I was only 5 or 6 years old at the time. But I remember distinctly my father picking me up and holding me like this about as high as his shoulder was, and then leaning over so that I could see down in that vault through that glass top and see the original Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence. And folks, I'll tell you, it's when you're 6 years old, you don't really know necessarily the significance of what it is you're looking at. but you do know that it was significant enough to your parents for them to take you and your brothers, stand in that line, wait, your father to pick you up and hold you up so that you could see this. And I've been a constitutional conservative from that moment forward. That's how I define myself. It's what I believe in. You know, I absolutely know for a fact that the federal government has escaped its chains that the founders put on it when they drafted that Constitution 230 years ago. We've got to get back to that constitutional kind of government, not just a separation of powers horizontally, but a separation of powers vertically. And let me tell you something about that vertical separation. It is not the federal government here and the state governments here. It's the state governments up here and the federal government down here. The states are to be preeminent. That was the design of the founders, and that's what we need to get back to today. And so as a governor in the state of Florida, I will do everything humanly possible to push back against federal overreach and the abuse. Whenever they step outside the box of the enumerated powers, we're going to push back against them to the extent that we possibly can. So that's something that I absolutely believe in. So I was 5 or 6 at the time, so that was like 55 years ago. So 55 years later, I'm 60 years old. I'm now the chairman of the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida, and we do an event every year in Brevard County, Florida, called the Constitution Day Dinner, in which we honor our founders, our Constitution, the men and women of our armed forces, and of course our first responders. We've been honoring them, and we've had some great speakers at that Constitution Day dinner. Our 10th annual dinner will take place next year, but we've had Bob Levy from the Cato Institute. I've had Michael Bolden come in from the 10th Amendment Center out in Los Angeles. I've had Dan Bongino last year and Lauren Spivak. I had Deneen Borelli, of course, Fox News contributor Deneen Borelli. She was terrific. This past year in September, we always have it in September, around the birth date of the Constitution. This past year I had House Speaker Richard Corcoran. That was a fun evening because he and I are, he's probably going to be running for governor himself at the end of the legislative session. He was one of my speakers. My keynote speaker was Tom Woods, who actually wrote the book Nullification, along with the Politically Incorrect Guide to American History and a number of other books. So that was a great evening. And it was a little interesting for me to be introducing Richard Corcoran, who may be running for governor. I introduced him. I told everyone, I said, he's not just the Speaker of the House, he might be our next governor, because after all, if he does announce, he'll automatically become the second best candidate in the race. So that it got more laughs that night. But it was a great evening. Now, so here's the thing. In my capacity as chairman of the Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida for the last 7 years, entirely in a voluntary capacity, there's no pay there, I cover all my own expenses. I've been going back and forth to Tallahassee for the last 7 years during committee weeks leading up to the legislative session, as well as during the session itself. We always put together an agenda of bills that we either support or oppose, and then we do our best to work the ones we support through the process and to try to stop the ones that we oppose. And I did bring with me this evening our legislative agenda that we've put together for 2018. I'll just give you a sample of some of the bills that are on it. That's actually the poll results. Okay, of course, campaign finance reform, I'll come back to that issue, but growth management bills, we're working on a bill this year that would require localities, when they establish their growth plans, that they would have to put in a provision for property rights as one of the areas that they have to take into account whenever they're working through their growth management plans. But we've also got bills that we're working on to try to get rid of, or at least rein in, community reinvestment agencies. There's been a tremendous amount of abuse with those agencies. I know you've had some problems here in Broward County. We've had them up in Brevard as well. Direct primary care is absolutely critical that we get this direct primary care bill passed. Of course, concealed weapons and firearms bills, we're very big supporters of our Second Amendment rights. Traffic infraction detectors, red light cameras, we have a real shot at finally getting rid of red light cameras once and for all this year. We've been working on that for a number of years now. So we've just got a lot of things. And of course, crony capitalism in the state of Florida, picking winners and losers. Did you know that the state of Florida actually gives $2 million a year to 8 different professional sports franchises around the state of Florida? It's absolutely absurd that we would be giving $2 million of taxpayer money to billionaire sports teams owners under some idea that it was necessary to do this in order to attract professional sports teams to the state of Florida. So that's just another example of a bill that we're opposed, that we're trying to get passed to eliminate that program altogether. We're also working, there's another bill where they set up a funding source where these owners can tap into state funds to expand their stadiums. And we're working to try to get rid of that as well. So there's a lot going on in Tallahassee that we've always been involved in up there and always worked very hard on. But here's the thing that I have found about Tallahassee, and it's one of the things that has really motivated me to get into this race. And that's the issue of campaign finance reform. Because here's the thing. I am absolutely convinced, after 7 years of going back and forth to Tallahassee, that the people of Florida have lost their voice in the process. You are not being listened to. Now, your legislators will come home at re-election time and they'll run for re-election and they'll tell you how important the grassroots are and what a difference your opinion makes to them. But I can tell you from personal experience that we have a political class in Tallahassee, Florida, that consists of the politicians, the bureaucrats, the lobbyists, and the special interests that the lobbyists represent. And it is an echo chamber up there. They only listen to each other. They only do each other's business. They're concerned mostly with how they scratch each other's backs and not nearly as concerned with what the people of Florida need back in their home districts. It has gotten that bad because here's how the problem comes about and here's how it works. And Bruce knows this. When we established our candidacy for governor, we had to file a piece of paper with the state of Florida, establishing our bank account and who our campaign treasurer was going to be. And the law says that the most we can take as a contribution into that campaign account is $3,000. That's it, there's a cap. But here's the problem. If I want to, I can take a step right over here and I can start something called a political committee. Open a separate bank account. This is as a candidate. Open a separate bank account and accept unlimited contributions into that account and put some grand sounding name on that political committee, like Floridians for Truth and Justice or Floridians for a Better Business Environment or something like that. And if I wanted to, I could run practically my entire campaign out of my political committee instead of out of my campaign account. And folks, that's what they're doing. And it's become, with each passing election cycle, the problem has gotten worse and worse and worse, to the point now where, just as an example, and if he was standing right here in this room, I'd still say this, so I don't want anybody to think I'm talking behind his back, but Adam Putnam, our Commissioner of Agriculture, has his campaign account, and he has a political committee called Florida Grown. And if you go to the website for Florida Grown and check the contribution reports there, you're going to find that there's at least $2.5 million in that account that came to him from the utility companies in Florida. Florida Power and Light, Duke Energy. And here's another part of the problem with these political committees. Only about $900,000 of that is in direct contributions. You can see where Florida Power stroked him a check for $250,000, but what you don't know is that also on his contribution report, there are contributions to his political committee from other political committees with great sounding names. But guess what? The utility companies have made contributions to these other political committees that have then turned around and made contributions back to his political committee. And the way the system is set up right now, a contribution can go from political committee A to committee B to committee C to committee D, and then it finally ends up in the committee of one of these candidates. And you'd have to be a forensic accountant to be able to track the money back to its original source. That's how bad this is. So when I say that it's a political class and they're only listening to each other, this is what I'm talking about. And unfortunately, they like it that way. I think it's terrible. I think it's terribly wrong for that kind of a system to be set up. In fact, we think it's so wrong that, as Kate was saying, about 4 years ago, we started the Come Clean Florida Coalition, which consists of our organization, Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida, Liberty First Network, Campaign for Liberty, the Florida 10th Amendment Action Center. We all got together and a couple of the different Tea Party groups from around the state, and we formed the Come Clean Florida Coalition. And I'm very pleased to be able to tell you that I'll be in Tallahassee tomorrow at 1 o'clock. We're doing a press conference with Representative Joe Gruters from Sarasota, and also Senator Greg Stubbe who's also from the same county.